This podcast is sponsored by ebookit.com, self-publishing solutions for the independent author and small press. Visit us today at ebookit.com.
Welcome to the Toastmasters podcast, the official podcast of Toastmasters International. Hello, everybody. This is Greg Gazin.
And I'm Ryan Levesque.
It's always a treat to speak with our international president during their term. And today, we have a real treat of having a second visit. The topic of today's discussion is the 2020-2021 International President Richard Peck's virtual tour of Toastmasters clubs around the world that he has been undertaking since last October. And he's visited just over 140 countries. Now, we already know who our special guest is. Ryan, take it away.
Yes, Greg. President Peck's journey is covered in the August 2021 issue of the Toastmaster Magazine. The article is entitled A President's Path Around the World. International President Richard Peck, welcome back to the Toastmasters podcast.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you, hearing both of you on this podcast today. Interested in hearing how the conversation is going to transpire today.
Now, we're pretty excited about getting into the tour itself, but before we begin, we knew that this was going to be an unusual year from the outset. Richard, how did it turn out for you? What was your experience like?
We did know it was going to be an unusual year when we entered into it. It could have been looked at as a challenging year, but I think we found ways to look for more opportunities than facing challenges. And as I met with individuals around the world, I found that they were finding ways to become connected, to stay engaged in a time when they could have really been disconnected. So for me, it was a time in our organization where I found a renewed interest or an increased interest in individuals finding ways to stay connected and to help one another. Something that I don't know that if it weren't for the environment that we're in now, we would have really had the opportunity to observe.
Makes sense.
And Richard, I think your tour is an excellent example of that connectivity that we experienced. I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of insight into how the idea for the tour unfolded for you. How did you come up with the idea of doing this along with all of the other responsibilities that you have as president?
Well, thank you for the question. When I took on the role of president this year, we had already been in the midst of these unusual times for 5-6 months at that point. And we had seen a shift in the organization where we knew we weren't going to be able to meet in person. Conferences had to be canceled. The future of certain events were uncertain. And I realized that the ability to physically meet with people from a presidential standpoint was going to more than likely be off the table this year. And I wanted to find a way in which we could really try to connect the organization, how I could be there to show our members that I supported them and was there for them, as well as the board of directors being there for them. And I'll remember I was sitting with John Lurkwin, who's in our research group. And I said to John, I want to try something a little different this year. He was open to listening to my idea. And I said, I want to try and visit one club in every country. And I could see he was thinking about it and not sure how we would make this happen, or if we could even make this happen. It had never been tried before. And then I added a twist to it. And that was that I didn't want to just show up at a meeting. I wanted to take an active role at the meeting, give a speech, be an evaluator, be a Toastmaster of the day, whatever the club needed, so that they could see that I was willing to do what we want them to do, what we asked them to do. And John Lurkwin and Jessica Mobeck at World Headquarters, along with Kelly Gow, started developing questions to ask the clubs, identifying the clubs we were going to meet at. And that's really how it started. We were never sure we were going to be able to complete it, or whether the clubs were going to be accepting of it, being that it was such a challenging time for them.
Mm.
And you had mentioned to us that you wanted to be not Mr. President, but just Richard.
Yeah, just Richard. I think when we're in a meeting environment, especially in a club meeting environment, we need to get rid of those formalities. I think that when individuals view you from a title standpoint, it can shift some of their thinking on how they want to do things. And I heard it from a couple of clubs that I visited where I was given a pathway speech, and the evaluator came on and said, I really wasn't sure how to evaluate the international president. Well, you're not evaluating the international president. You're evaluating a member who's giving a speech. So I wanted to get rid of that title when I was in the club environment because I felt that it would put individuals at ease with what they were doing, with what their tasks were, what their role might have been.
I understand that you gave speeches at roughly 75 to 85% of your meetings. And that was the question I was going to ask you, is that I'm assuming that you were evaluated for each one. And I was curious as whether or not there was a sense of apprehension.
There was, according to what I heard when I got to the meeting. The Toastmaster would introduce me, and then they'd introduce my evaluator, and it was we had a hard time getting an evaluator for this meeting because no one wanted to evaluate the international president. So there was some of that apprehension, and then to go and thank this individual for stepping up and being willing to evaluate this speech. And I was like, well, I'm glad that someone stepped up to give the evaluation because we're all trying to work on that skill, right? That's why we're here to build those communication skills, and providing me feedback just helps me get better at it.
I was thinking they may have had some unexpected absences from their meetings.
So that's a funny story because there were meetings where I had a feeling that the club was a little overwhelmed with the amount of individuals that were in attendance. Where I'd be at a club that I'd look them up in advance and, maybe they had a base of 20, 22 members, and they'd open up the Zoom meeting, and the next thing you know, there'd be 90 to 100 participants on the call. And, you could almost get that sense of it being overwhelming to some, but they all handled it so graciously. It was just amazing to watch.
Great learning experience.
Yeah. Richard, I'm really interested to know, as international president, if you're giving speeches, I imagine that most, if not all of them, are tied into the Pathways program.
Mm-hmm.
And several of the Pathways assignments involve real-world projects. So I wonder, have you incorporated any of your presidential duties or presidential plans into your Pathways assignments?
There were a couple of clubs that I visited where they asked me to give a keynote that wasn't part of the Pathways program, where I spoke more about my leadership journey and my view of where I was going to be when this was over. But most of the speeches that I gave that were related to Pathways were ones that I felt would either give the club a good insight into who I was as a person through an icebreaker style speech or a personal reflection, or something that was a storytelling just a little bit different, something that they may not have thought that the international president would have done. And then there were a couple clubs that were interested in learning about my drag racing and how that applied to leadership and my role as international president. So there were some clubs that essentially said, this is what we'd like you to speak to. You figure out which path it goes into and which project it goes into, but this is what we'd like you to speak to.
Richard, could you tell us a little bit about what some of the meetings were like? I mean, obviously, visiting over 140 countries, there's all kinds of different things that happen. Maybe if you can just share a couple of stories with us about that.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed is that table topics has become the big technology driver in clubs now, in that they're finding new ways to present it in this online environment. So it might have been a Jeopardy style board I saw at one club, or roulette wheel with names on it that as they rolled the wheel, your name might pop up. You got the table topics. I think I mentioned in the article a club that did a Pecha Kucha style table topics. So I think table topics has been the big advancement there. But one of the other things I saw that was really impressive to me was clubs where they're not a English speaking club. So they might be a French speaking club, an Arabic speaking club, Spanish speaking club, etc. How they're using the software to help individuals who are not native speakers to understand what's going on in the meeting. So in Zoom, which is what a lot of them were using, you have the ability to put a live interpreter into the meeting. People can choose to hear it in their native language. And I thought that was just an amazing shift in trying to bring people together so that they didn't feel like not only they were just a guest, but they were an outsider. Because if you've ever attended a meeting and you don't understand what's going on, you can really feel disconnected. And they found ways to help keep people connected. I also attended a club meeting where they were a French-speaking only club. That's what they were, yet they conducted their entire meeting that time in English, just so that those who were English speakers would feel engaged. There was an amazing shift in that need to be able to find ways to connect everybody.
It's interesting because I was one of the founders of a English-Spanish bilingual club, and I don't speak Spanish. I do speak French, a little bit of Italian. And I remember once evaluating a Spanish icebreaker where I only comprehended just a couple of words. So I was going to ask you, I'm assuming that not every meeting had translators, not every meeting had the translation capabilities. I was curious, what were things like for those types of meetings? How did you get by?
Yeah, so there were those meetings where there were not. However, there were individuals who were interpreting in the chat window. So you weren't hearing it, but there was an occasion where people would provide a translation in the chat window of what was going on. There were those times. However, I've been to meetings, they're not English speaking, and I don't speak the language that's being spoken. I find myself focusing on different things during the meeting. So where we're used to listening to the words and understanding it from that standpoint, I find myself focusing more on body language and vocal variety, because there's a lot of expression sometimes that goes into people when they're speaking. And you don't necessarily have to hear the words or understand the words to be able to feel the emotion. I had a accredited speaker once tell me that they had viewed a speech from two different perspectives. One is they watched the speech with the audio and video combined. Then they took it and they took the video out of it and just listened to the audio. And that when they just listened to one as compared to the entire thing, the story was different, the way it was interpreted. So I think you can put yourself in an environment where you can focus on things a little bit differently and view it differently. And that's where I think the emotional connection can come in.
That sounds like great advice for somebody who is working on their own presentations and their own speeches. To do that, go through that exercise, I think it would be really helpful for them. It's great advice. Thanks.
Richard, I've often heard advice given that traveling can provide one of the greatest ways to broaden one's horizon and to grow as a person. And I've certainly seen that in my own experience as well. And I wonder if that, in your experience, applies in the virtual realm. So I wanted to ask you, how did this experience change you, or maybe change your impression of Toastmasters and the community and what it means to be a Toastmaster? What could you share with us along those lines?
In 2003, 2004, I was going for my master's degree. And one of the courses that I took caused a shift in my thinking. My master's is in international business, and we were preparing to do an international cohort to Central and Eastern Europe. They brought in an individual to teach us about cultural awareness and cultural dynamics, something that up until that point I hadn't really thought much about. I knew there were differences, but hadn't much thought about it. After attending that class, though, it caused me to start viewing things from a more global, more personal perspective, especially when it came to cultural and differences. This year, being able to travel around the world allowed us to experience more culture, learn more about people, have more of an awareness. I think it brought the organization together a little bit closer from that standpoint. Because when you think about it, clubs are generally siloed in their nature. The members stay in their clubs, they know their area and their district, but they don't necessarily get out beyond that on a regular basis. This year, we had individuals that were traveling around the world as well, experiencing that culture and getting a chance to immerse themselves in it, even if it was only for a couple of hours. And what I will say is that clubs were so proud of who they were, so proud of their countries, their cultures, that integrated into their meetings, they would give a presentation, something about the country, something about the culture, try to teach the guests in attendance a word in the native language. And that, I think, just caused a shift in the unity that we're seeing. And for me, it was great to be part of that, to witness that, because I truly believe that the more we understand about each other, the better off we're going to be, the better off we'll get along. Doesn't mean we'll agree all the time, but it's better to understand why you're not agreeing than just to assume a reason. And this year, I think we've been able to make our differences a lot smaller.
It sounds like the experience has been such a great benefit. Do you see, Richard, this trend continuing as we sort of go back to normal, as we go back to the face-to-face meetings, doing this, visiting clubs virtually, or even becoming members of clubs in a different city, country, etc.?
Yeah, and I've seen that already. We've already got that situation going on where members are joining clubs around the world, or and there may be clubs members around the world that are joining clubs here in the United States, clubs in the United States, North America, joining other countries. They're already doing that. The clubs, I think, are going to be more in a hybrid mode going forward, but there's a lot of risk and a lot of difficulty that can occur in a hybrid club. So I think we're going to have to be cautious on the way we do that. I've also heard of members joining other clubs so that they can learn a second language because they're immersing themselves in a club where that other language is their primary. So maybe it's French or Spanish or Arabic, Dutch, something along those lines, Portuguese. And members are joining those clubs just so that they can get that experience, learn a little bit. I did speak to a member not too long ago who said they were actually going to deliver their first speech in another language. And it was a language that they were just starting to study, but they were going to deliver their first pathway speech in that language.
Wow.
You can see how there's a little bit of a shift going on here in our thinking, which I think is great.
Yeah. I know of one individual that has joined a club in another country because they want to actually do business in that country. So I thought that was actually quite novel.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a good way to understand the culture of the country and how to do business within it.
Sure. Richard, I was excited to read in the article that you're putting together some type of online journal to spotlight the tour that you undertook. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that might look like?
So this is a request that I made of the clubs because I know I could tell how proud they were of who they were and that they wanted to share it with those in attendance. And I said, we've got to be able to share more of this because there were only 145 clubs or 145 countries that were visited. How do we get the word out about these clubs? How do we get the word out about these countries and connect our organization a little bit different? So at the end of the meetings, I would make a request of the club that they provide a write-up of what they would like the rest of the Toastmasters world to know about them, their club, their country, their culture, whatever they would like to share. And I generally preface it this way. If you could stand on a stage in front of 365,000 other Toastmasters, what would you want them to know about you? And I've asked them to send me their write-up. They could make it as long as they want. And then we will put it together in a journal that will share with the clubs that were visited, and we'll post it on social media so that other clubs who may not have been a part of the tour can get a sense of who those clubs are, and members can get a sense of who those clubs are, and maybe swing by and meet them at some point in the future.
That's really great. And when can we expect to see the journal?
It's a busy couple of months now.
Come on, Richard, get on it.
I'm hoping to have it done by the middle to end of August. I'd like to have it done before my term is over.
Wow.
And I have been receiving some of the write-ups that I've asked for, and we'll send a reminder out to some of the clubs that haven't provided one yet, just to make sure that they get their opportunity to be included.
I was not expecting that answer. I was thinking November, December, January.
Exactly. That's what I was expecting as well.
Now, if you wait that long, in my opinion, it's going to be not overshadowed, but not going to be viewed the same. Isn't it always better to get your evaluation and your recapture at the end of what you're doing than putting it off for a couple months and then trying to have to go back through it? I'd much rather provide it at the beginning of the new year after the business meeting, so to speak, so that clubs have it.
Well, that's fantastic. As this has been an incredible year for you, and of course you're turning over the reins, are there any final words of wisdom or guidance or advice that you'd like to offer our listeners?
Continue to be who you are. Throughout this year, we really saw our members stepping forward, stepping up to help others. And I think that's a true testament to our members, to think about the organization from the ability to be able to help others reach farther than they think they can, help keep them involved. Additionally, look for the opportunities, focus on those. There's so many more opportunities that are out there than there are challenges. We tend to see the challenge because it's right in front of us, and we don't look up, down, or side to side to find the opportunities. If we find the opportunities, we can overcome all these challenges that we think we have there, that we feel we have. The World Tour this year was an opportunity to overcome a challenge of an organization that could have felt disconnected, of members that could have felt siloed and disconnected. Members reaching out around the world was their opportunity to be able to share who they are with others and to meet others. If we had just focused on the challenges or what we were going to miss out on, I don't know that we would have accomplished as much of that as we did this year. So continue to look for the opportunities and not focus so much on the challenge.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for your leadership for this year.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I just appreciate that you embraced the moment for what it was. No one would have faulted you if you served your term as president and did not take on this world tour opportunity in the midst of it. But you saw that was something where you could add some additional value, and you did it on behalf of the countries around the world where Toastmasters is represented. Thank you for doing that.
Well, if you remember correctly, in my inaugural speech, I said that leadership's not about being the center of attention. Leadership's about being the epicenter of action. And I think that this tour provided that action that was needed to kind of join our members together a little bit more. So I'm hoping that it served its purpose for what my intent was.
And maybe you weren't the center of attention, but you were certainly the catalyst.
Right.
Thank you.
I just want to remind our listeners that if you haven't heard our previous discussion with International President Richard Peck, episode 167 back in October, leading from the driver's seat, be sure to check that out. Lots of more great wisdom and insight from our president. Richard Peck, thank you again. It's always a pleasure, and we appreciate everything that you do.
Greg, Ryan, always my pleasure. Feel free to invite me back sometime in the future. I'll be glad to have a conversation with you again.
That's great. It's been an absolute pleasure. And folks, if you're listening, if you've enjoyed this episode and you think that there's someone out there that might benefit from hearing it, please do take a moment to share it with them. You can get it at the Toastmasters podcast, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and also on the Toastmasters.org website.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Isn't it about time you published that book you've been thinking about? We can help with that. At ebookit.com, we've been providing authors and small presses with ebook publishing services since 2010. Visit us today at ebookit.com and let us know how we can help you.